There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the scale of the enemy. Remember this. Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea that they've already enlisted in the cause. Remember that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And then remember this. The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle. Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that. And know this. The day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance, will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many. One single thing will break the siege. Remember this. Try.
Welcome, Masters and Padawans, to episode 591 of Full of Sith. It's me, Bryan Young, and with me, as ever, well, not as lately, but as ever, the redoubtable Holly Frey.
With me, on occasion, when scheduling works out, that rat Holly Frey.
We've just been busy, and we've had some cool interviews, and... You know, it hasn't been planned that we haven't been doing it. I mean, I'll admit, last week I had a kid's birthday party, and then all of a sudden it was Monday, and I was like, holy crap.
It happens, man.
But it was okay. We had those Tony Gilroy interviews, and I hope folks enjoyed those.
Me too.
But I want to talk about Andor again this week.
I want to talk about Andor all the time.
Yeah, me too.
I will say this, and this may be just a me thing.
Yeah.
But because Andor is so amazing, everybody wants to talk about it. And now I find myself thinking sometimes, I'm like, did I talk about that on the show or did I talk about that with a friend? So if I ever repeat stuff, I'm sorry. I can't keep track of what I said to who.
Well, and I think that's actually just sort of like a symptom of how we talk about Star Wars on the show, is that the way we talk about Star Wars is just how we talk about Star Wars in general.
Yes, true.
When we talk about Star Wars in person, it's not any different than the way we talk about it on the show.
No.
What you hear on the show is pretty much what you get when you corner Holly and I in person and listen to us talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, I just swear more in person.
Oh, way more.
Way more.
Way more. And the euphemisms. Boy, howdy.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't believe you.
Look, I'm a colorful middle-aged lady.
That is certainly, well, I mean, yeah, I think the tattoos will, and the hair will certainly qualify as colorful. Sure.
Listen, I have a new tattoo I'm very excited about.
Yeah.
I think I have 2 new tattoos since last time we talked. Yeah, because for my birthday this year, we did a tattoo party.
Yeah,
where
I saw the pictures, yeah.
My tattoo artist is amazing, Brandy Smart, and she owns an art gallery here in Atlanta called Empire Arts Gallery, which is also where she does her tattooing, and she has a staff of tattoo artists as well. And so we had a party where they shut the gallery down early, and we had just privately like the gallery and our friends, and then they designed custom flash just for us, all of which is themed Docking Bay 54, so Star Wars and disco. And at the party, I got the droid disco ball that they have at the wedding on Chandrila, which is amazing, that plays that rocking version of Niemos. And then, but now I love all the Flash so much, there are several more pieces from it that I wanted. So now I have a Loth cat dressed as Elton John because we need silly, beautiful art all the time. Little disco Loth cat ready to rock it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks really glurpy right now because it's still fairly fresh and it's under its little clear bandage, so it looks like the Babadook, but it will be beautiful when the bandage comes off tomorrow.
I will take your word for it. Um, but yeah, no, Andor is something that I want to talk about a lot. And like it's funny when we were talking back and forth about what we wanted to talk about today. It was like, well, I want to talk about Andor, but unfortunately, there's so much in the news that is very Andor-like. And I was like, but I don't necessarily want to talk about like how relevant it is politically right now, but like it feels like I'm just angry about stuff right now also.
Yeah,
Um, but it feels inevitable, and I don't feel like the last time we got together to talk about Andor, um, we covered everything we wanted to Andor wise.
there's like no way to.
No. Um, and so I think we're gonna talk about Andor more. And one of the things I really wanted to dive into was just sort of the Ghorman Massacre,
Yeah.
into a lot more detail, right? There's a lot of layers of the storytelling there that if you listen to the interviews last week, Tony Gilroy talked a lot about where a lot of his inspiration in setting up how all of that worked came from real life, right? Like he was talking a lot about, oh, sorry. He was talking a lot about how he was drawing from history and a lot about how fascist movements start and a lot about how revolution starts and a lot about how fascism reacts to those and how fascism manipulates those through like actual lenses of history. And one of his touch points was that television show, The French Village, and how the French fought back under the occupation of Nazi Germany, um, during World War II, and how that inspired Andor so much that some of the actors from that show ended up as Gormans, and the Gore language really they used the phonetic base of French to build it.
Oh, I still want to learn the Gore language so bad.
Um, it's really cool,
Yeah.
but how like we're seeing some of those moves in action, but like it's really elegantly plotted the story where you've got Dedra in her first scene saying like you want to be able to count on a resistance that's going to do the wrong thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think we talked about it last time, but like that whole secret meeting echoes the historically significant Wannsee Conference, which was a secret meeting that Hitler had with a bunch of high level officials that were handpicked by him to really form the actual, like, hard lines of what their so-called final solution was going to be in terms of eliminating Jews. And so, like, when that whole meeting started, I was just like, like the air went out of me a little bit. Because there are so many historical touch points in this series, and that in particular really struck me very hard. So then to see them literally doing exactly the same thing, except in Star Wars, and being like, yes, we need to figure out ways to vilify them so that we can kill them all, was troubling and also like a great bit of writing in terms of the show itself.
Yeah, and it's doubly troubling to see that we have history telling us like, hey, this worked at one point, and then we have art mimicking that and saying like, look at how this worked in this piece of art, and like Edie's mom going like, ugh, those disgusting gore. I can't believe you're.
Yeah, she buys every piece of propaganda.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm here. I'm looking at this. Like, there's nothing. I'm not buying it. And he's doing that for those the double purpose of being that double agent because he knows that they're listening to him and that he can be that useful agent for the Empire because that's purposeful on his part to infiltrate them, to give them the information that the Empire wants them to have to inflame them. I mean, the Empire is doing things specifically to piss them off in order to,
To get them to respond.
yeah. Um, and it's horrifying. And so you see it in history and you see it reflected in art, but then it's so frustrating to see it reflected in our modern day and people not having learned either from history or from art. And we have 1,000 Edie Carnes going like, ugh, those people are so awful, just get them out of here.
Right.
Um, it's really frustrating. It's
Yeah,
really frustrating.
deeply. I mean, it's the playbook is so obvious, right? In terms of like exactly what we've been talking about, the vilification of people, and then propagandizing that vilification and making sure that there's a mouthpiece for it everywhere, and then watching people buy it. It's like um the other flip of all of this that really freaks me out is that those same people that we see buying all of the current propaganda about others who are perceived as evil in some way, then talking about how much they love Andor is freaking me out. I'm like, were you cheering for the Empire? I don't understand. And they are so bought in to the propaganda that they believe they are the rebels, which is what is wild to me.
I don't I legitimately don't see how they can draw that line where they're literally I don't see where that line can be drawn.
Me
Where
either, but I see people saying it.
that's the hard leap for me. Like how can you how like it doesn't that doesn't make any sense to me.
No, it does not.
Which is how effective that propaganda is.
Right.
Um I mean,
Well, and it's, in Dedra's case, to her point, she even says like the propaganda isn't enough. It's only going to get you so far. She's the one that really introduces that idea that you were saying. We need an insurrection that we can count on to do the wrong thing. And so it's the 1-2 punch of propaganda plus carefully placed people who can help foment that sense of resistance in a way that will ultimately be detrimental to the people who are resisting. It's so ooh, it's stomach churning. It's so snaky.
yeah. And we see that happening in the United States today. And I know it's sad to see it happening in the United States with I know a lot of people are looking at Andor as political commentary and I read some commentary from folks who are part of the Democratic establishment who have been telling folks like stop comparing what's happening to Andor, it's cringy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of Kamala Harris's senior advisors was putting that out across social media, and I was just like, no wonder the Democratic establishment is not meeting the moment right now, is because they don't know how to read the room. Um,
I have a really w why is it perceived as cringy?
I
Like, what is
can't,
their complaint in that?
there was no explanation beyond it. It was just, it's cringy. Um,
Dang.
and I think part of it is that, um, I don't know. I really don't know. I really, this was also, um, a senior advisor who was yelling about like how there's no loyalty in the party anymore and complaining about how, there are these young upstarts that they're treating like obstacles rather than the future of the party.
Right,
Um, where they're just not reading the room on what people are actually asking for and
right,
what people need to see, and they're sort of um they're the senators in Andor that are just like, well, we'll just try to stop them. We're just going to try to sit here and try to stop, Palpatine with our legislation. Um, it's there's that really terrific moment in Bad Batch with Operation War Mantle, right?
hmm
Where um, Senator Organa and Senator Chuchi are trying to get the clones taken care of and stop the bill from passing to make it so that they're not going to just like get rid of the clones and expose the genocide on Camino and try to defeat the bill completely. And they bring all this proof about what Rampart did. And instead of defeating the bill, Palpatine comes out, says, "Thank you so much for revealing all of this stuff. Rampart is the worst. Arrest him. You're absolutely right. This is proof that, we need this bill and we can't let Rampart's, you know, treachery defeat this really important bill." And then it wins with all this overwhelming support. And it's like they're the people who are doing the most harm are the ones calling the shots like that. And
right,
any bit of opposition is um anyone that's part of the opposition right now, like every move that they're making that's not very loud, specific resistance and completely gumming up the works to prevent anything from happening, is allowing them to just continue moving their agenda forward. And their agenda is completely dismantling the government as we know it and um, making, the lives of everyone that, making the lives of the vast majority of people living in the country worse.
yeah, yeah. I did we talk about when last we discussed Andor the f complaints that I know I have seen in a few places um that some people had that there were elements of the early episodes that felt very sort of useless. Right, like the Maya Pang Brigade and even some of the Saw Gerrera stuff. People are like, I don't get it. Why is any of this in there? And to me, like those are incredibly important. Um, I don't know how much this applies to like current events as we've been discussing them, but it was a thing that I have seen a number of people say, and so I wanted to bring it up because, right, what that is, like, no, we don't see them again. Like the that messy ass crew that, Cassian has to deal with in the early episodes. And of course, we do see Saw again, but I know there are some people that have been like, did they do all of this just to show us that he has, that he's maybe not as stable as you would hope somebody with the kind of firepower he gets his hands on would be. But the whole point is that the rebellion is messy as hell. And those early stages in particular of the rebellion almost have to be messy as hell. And it goes back to what I know we talked about before of like how sanitized the rebellion is by the time we meet Luke Skywalker and how he gets to kind of walk in and be a hero at a time when all of the ugly stuff and all of the gritty nastiness and the wet work has kind of been subsumed and like cleanly tied up elsewhere and not part of the romanticized rebellion. But like that's often how it starts. Nobody like magically says we're going to rebel against these horrible things going on and here's the plan. I mean the whole storyline of Andor is seeing disparate groups all start to coalesce together, right? Like episode 9 where Mon makes her big statement finally is that moment that shifts things into high gear for the rebellion and is a line in the sand that clearly gets stepped over. But I just I was a little surprised at how many people are like, I don't get it, why are these things happening that seem to have no impact later on? And I'm like, well, they were on Yavin, they're laying some groundwork. Like Yavin is gonna become really important, and they were there doing some things early on that would have impacted the ability to develop that place as a rebel base. I don't know. That was just my little pontification on the things that people think are unimportant. Maybe they're just not connecting to their part in the bigger scheme.
Um, I think part of it too is that none of them know who each other are, and the Empire's so pervasive that they literally cannot trust each other.
Yes.
That the Empire is such a big entity and that they have enemies everywhere, right? That idea, I have friends everywhere, is the opposite of how the season starts.
Right.
And if they would have been that infighting is what keeps them from coalescing. It's only when they do start to come together despite their differences that they're able to start accomplishing things. And it's when even despite their differences, they're able to like the people on the ground ignore the you know the people at the top that are like, whoa, the people playing respectability politics at the top, going like, well, I don't know, like Senator Pamlo and folks like that are like, I don't know, like these people we shouldn't trust them, and like,
Right.
Senator Draven blew up this base, and all the people who are actually taking the biggest risks and actually doing the work are the ones who are going like, you guys aren't reading the room.
Yeah.
We're the ones we're the ones doing the work. We're the ones who understand what's going on. You need to be listening to us. You need to be representing us. Just because you're supposedly representing us doesn't mean you know better than us. Um, and I think that idea that like if they would have coalesced and stopped their infighting sooner, they would have been able to do that. But 4 years, 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, when we see early in season 2 and all of season 1, the Empire was this monolith. The ISB was unstoppable. They were everywhere. You didn't know who to trust. And it wasn't until they started that coalescing that they were able to start overcoming that and realize that the Empire was vulnerable. And I think a lot of that had to do with some of the stuff that was in Nemec's manifesto, the spread of that idea that like authoritarianism is brittle.
Right.
It's
Takes
not
a lot of
natural.
work.
Yeah, it's tons of work. There's that. Um, that quote from the LAPD chief that was saying that, like, we can handle one 10,000 person protest in one spot, but if we had 10 1,000 person protests around town, it would break the LAPD. Like, we wouldn't be able to handle a protest like that.
Right.
Um,
Which is
because, yeah,
interesting in terms of Andor because right, part of the that um issue of disparate groups all kind of popping up and not being connected and not being able to trust each other, there is a degree to which it appears Luthen Rael has been orchestrating and stirring that pot for a while, right? Like we see him kind of go through the point where he's like everything has to change now. Like um now we have to be out in the open. It's a different game when he is talking to Clea and he's like, it's too many different threads now. I can't keep it all straight. It's like too much going on. Um, which is interesting, right? There is a certain merit to that idea of disparate groups all kind of operating independently because it does create it puts the regime back on its heels because it's not sure where to focus its efforts. But eventually, it does have to be part of a bigger whole, which is also just an interesting thing. I don't know how much people really think about
yeah,
in terms of how these kinds of insurrections work and how resistance works. You had mentioned the French resistance earlier, and like there's so many interesting things if you look back at history and particularly World War II history of, different resistance groups popping up around Europe and particularly in occupied countries and how they had to find each other and, there were bumps in terms of getting them all in alignment. There was also the concern, right? There was a Vichy government in France. There were people in France that cooperated with the Nazis. So it's not as clean and easy as anybody would like it to be, historically or in fiction. And I think that's an important thing for people to remember in general. Like when we watch these things, we want it to all be like A to B to C to D to E to F. And it's, of course, it's an obvious through line. And it's like, that wouldn't be very realistic.
yeah. No, that's not really how things work. And you know, there are compromises that had to be made. That's one of the things I love so much about the that Mask of Fear book, where you had Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera, each of them saying, "I have the key to bring down the Empire, and the rest of you are idiots."
Right.
Right? Mon Mothma saying, like, we have to fix this politically. Like the political system is going to save us. And Bail Organa saying like, I think this quiet sort of like bear like this quiet sort of strategic rebellion is and slowly gaining strength is going to work. And Saw Gerrera's out there going like direct action now.
Right. We got to blow some stuff up.
Yeah. And each of them thought that they were wrong. The others were not doing it the way they would.
Right.
And they were all right and they were all wrong. And they needed all three of those approaches working separately to defeat the Empire.
Yes.
They were all correct approaches. You needed the direct action. You needed Saw Gerrera going around and blowing stuff up to disrupt them. You needed Bail Organa going around building that slow rebellion, and you needed Luthen Rael doing that too, and you needed Mon Mothma working on her political solutions from the inside of the system the whole time, and you needed Bail Organa doing that from his perspective too, and you needed allies on the inside, you needed allies on the outside, you needed people who worked within the framework of the law of the Empire, you needed people who worked without it and eschewed it completely. You needed people who did peaceful protests. You needed people who committed to violence like Saw. The Empire didn't care. I mean, like, the Empire didn't care how you protested. Your protest was incorrect. There
Right.
was no correct form of protest that they would accept. That's the whole thing about these authoritarian regimes. You telling them that they're wrong in any way is incorrect. So there's no correct form of protest. So scolding someone that their chosen form of protest is incorrect.
Right. And it's we see a microcosm version of it even on Gorman, right? Like we see how the Gorman front has some fracturing within it because they don't all agree on how they should go forward. There are people within it that want violence and there are people that want peaceful protest. But there's a that beautiful moment. I mean, unfortunately, it does not work out for them, but there is that beautiful moment where as things are really heating up on the square, what actually unites all of them is when one of them starts singing their anthem. And it is the reminder that they all need that they're all the same. They are all it on the same side fighting the same evil, which was really beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it was. It really was. And it was something that it's interesting seeing um it's interesting seeing um how that whole situation played out too with the the tailor who Cassian had met with earlier in the earlier episodes, realizing that the Empire was baiting them and trying to tell people to be peaceful and to not go to the square because they were being baited into going there. And then the idea that the Empire had set up that group of terrible stormtroopers to
Hmm.
be murdered so they could blame it on the crowd, which is something that happens a lot, right?
Yeah.
Those interviews I did with Tony Gilroy, he was saying that like he'd been doing all kinds of research and he hadn't come across there was these student riots in the I think he said it was the 60s that he didn't even know about where they did that where they they killed their own police, blamed it on the students, and then
Yeah.
you know did that sort of thing. And some of the reports coming out now are like um not that not that the um ICE in LA are like hurting each other, um but they're coming out and saying like people are attacking us, so we're tear gassing them and stuff. But like the footage of the reports are coming out, and
Yeah.
it's like people are literally peacefully protesting, not doing anything. And ICE is just like they literally. I watched a video before we recorded where ICE uh had shot a 13-year-old girl in the face that was like stopped at traffic. Like they were trying to take their van out. Um, and there were some protesters stopping them on one side. There was this traffic that they stopped traffic, so it was literally just innocent bystanders. The bystanders were watching, and they started shooting tear gas into the bystanders and hit a 13-year-old girl who went to the hospital with a tear gas canister.
Yeah.
And their official story is these protesters were attacking them, which is functionally the same thing as having their own people shoot their own people.
Right.
Um, it's those kinds of tactics, and it's horrible to see it going on here, and it was awful to see it in Star Wars. But at least in Star Wars, it was fiction.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
guess
It
life
is
imitates art.
on the one hand, right? I know we have all had that moment of like, wow, this show was being written, years ago and it's so prescient, but really it's the same pattern of behavior that
These are just authoritarian
mankind has been
playbooks.
doing over and over and over again. Yeah.
Um, these are just authoritarian playbooks. Um, and this is authoritarians use violence because they can't imagine other forms of problem solving,
Yeah.
right? Like violence is that language that they speak, right? This is how they solve problems. Um, and it's awful, especially when it's against like your own people. Like, you know, that was the solution Krennic went straight to, and it's like, okay, we need their calcite. Well,
Yeah.
how do we, could we talk to them? Could we do this? No, let's vilify them and get ready to just like start attacking them so
Right.
that
And
we'll just
it's
take them. We'll just
you
take it.
bring up an interesting thing that has in the context of Star Wars, it kind of cracks me up. In reality, it sucks because it does happen. Where they're like, we've just tried everything. We've tried to synthesize it. We've tried to, and it's like, but they never once were like, let's see, is there a way we could have a discussion?
Yeah, could we?
They're willing to staff entire labs full of people trying to figure out a way around it, but not to actually have any kind of real statesmanship or leadership or, actual grown-up discussion.
Yeah, and this is something that's been happening with natural resources in on Earth for thousands of years, whether it's spices or natural, like everything from spices to oil, right?
Mhm.
To natural gas, to gold, to, jade mines.
Diamonds.
Yeah, like whatever it is, it's just like, and it's disturbing that people that especially the current regime that's doing a lot of this stuff isn't focusing on climate change and for some reason have decided that it's somehow a hoax because we're going to be doing this over water soon enough.
Uh-huh.
It's going to start happening around the world. It has started happening around the world over water. Um, because water is going to be that natural resource because weather patterns are shifting because of man-made climate change.
Yeah.
Um, Water is going to be that scarce natural resource because of those shifting weather patterns, and it's going to cause wars the same way gold and diamonds are. And instead of being statesmanlike about it, people are just going to start shooting or creating propaganda, and we're going to have Ghorman massacres.
Uh-huh.
And it's all there in history, and we've seen it, and we've seen it reflected in our art, and we've seen it reflected in our Star Wars. And I just don't know what more to do for people to learn those lessons.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, there it always cracks me up because there are people who want to turn off that part of the critical thinking that goes along with consuming media and entertainment and be like, I just want to watch the story. I don't want it to be political. And it's like, wait a minute.
I don't think
How?
that's literally never been possible with Star Wars.
Right. Star Wars is inherently political. It always has been. I mean, every interview with George where he talks about the inspiration for it has always referenced political issues and world events. So I mean, part of me is honestly fascinated. Like, what is it like to just watch a piece of art that's clearly inspired by historical events, even if it sets them in an imaginary galaxy, and just be like, "Yep, bang bangs and intrigue, but none of that's pertinent." I don't know how you divorce it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is that? What is it like to live like that? It almost, I mean, I'm almost envious because it sounds very lovely to be able to turn critical thinking off and just space out, but probably not good in the long term.
Yeah, like I wouldn't even begin to know how to turn my brain off like that.
Me either.
I watched this really amazing interview with George Lucas from a while ago where it seemed like one of the news shows was trying to get him in this like moment where they're like, "Well, clearly you've benefited from capitalism," and he's like, this whole capitalism thing where we're all trying to earn more money than the others and like claw over each other." He's like, "This is caveman thinking. Like, what's why are we doing this? It doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Isn't it better that we live in a world where we're all just like taking care of each other? Like, that's the world we should be striving for. Like, this is us beating each other over the head with hammers to make more money than the other and to take more money from each other and like this doesn't make any sense. Like it's nonsensical. Like why
Yeah, it's ultimately self-destructive.
yeah, like this is the primary like problem with the world today. And it's like he hits the nail on the head with everything he's been talking about with Star Wars and everything Star Wars has continued to talk about for the last almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And I think this is why Star Wars is still so relevant and still so talked about is that it, it's always been political. It's always had those undertones to it. It's always had those extra messages. Yes, Star Wars is a mythology built for 12-year-olds, as George Lucas has always said it was. But there's this moral center to it that has people digging deeper and saying like, oh wait, like we're learning something about history, about ourselves, about how we should be, about what that balance is. And George was always saying that balance is to stop beating each other over the head, trying to get something better than someone else or holding something over someone else or,
Yeah.
having that greed, but living together and providing for each other. And people just continue loving Star Wars and not getting it, and it just keeps baffling me. And yeah, like that Democratic senior advisor, that Democratic operative going like it's cringy comparing Andor to what's going on in Los Angeles right now is so out of touch with what pop culture means, with what art means, with what Star Wars means. That it's no wonder that the Democrats are floundering to meet the moment of the authoritarian regime that has taken over. George Lucas has always said that like we don't democracies aren't taken over, they're given away. And he showed us that with the prequels, which he was patterning after. I mean, yes, there were some modern jabs at modern politicians in there, but he was looking at the ancient Roman Empire. He was looking at all kinds
Yeah.
of other historical examples where democracies and the example of democracy was eroded by corruption and commerce and greed, and said, "This is where we're heading." And I would be surprised if even he predicted it would happen this quickly.
Right. I did have a minor revelation as you were saying that regarding the person saying it's cringy to compare the two, um, that I hadn't thought about before, and maybe you did, and I'm just being a ding dong. But I think they're wrong, by the way. But I think what their take is that it's somehow demeaning to current events to compare them to current entertainment. And I'm like, have you watched this show? Because you might feel differently if you actually did. Like that somehow, entertainment is not worthy of being considered in that way, and particularly, fake and in space entertainment. But that's also why it is so important. I mean, you referenced that George made these, and has always talked about making them for 12-year-olds, but like, right, because they're didactic and they're trying to teach those kids how not to be when they grow up. I mean, that's not that doesn't make it lesser. And I mean, Andor obviously falls outside of that scope. I would say Andor is really the first thing that's not made for 12-year-olds in Star Wars. I mean, I'm sure there are 12-year-olds that dig it and get it, but I'm just saying less so than the main movies and the Skywalker saga does it feel like it was made for kids, but all of it, the whole point is that art is teaching us about who we are. That's what art is.
Yeah.
Oh, humans, you disappoint me at every turn.
Yeah. 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 It's rough. I'll see if I can find that quote about him uh
Perfect.
where he talks about
Perfect.
how he wants to see society defined by compassion, where
Oh,
people get the best
dream.
life they could possibly have rather than just like what we can accumulate.
Yeah, the
Imagine that,
dream.
right?
The dream, the actual dream.
Yeah. Rather than other stuff. Yeah.
There's also the side of you that's a political animal. I mean, you
Yeah.
are, among people who know you, a billionaire who's not that crazy about capitalism.
That's true.
Tell me what.
Well, I grew up in the 60s. I grew up in San Francisco. And so I've been formed in a certain kind of way about, believing in democracy and believing in America. And I'm a very ardent patriot. But I'm also a very ardent believer in democracy, not capitalist democracy. And I do not believe that the rich should be able to buy the government. And that's just the way I feel.
Is that the America you see where the rich have bought the government?
Well, come on. It's been that way for a long time. And it's just, it's not right. And it's not going to work. And
will it change?
Well, I hope it changes. I mean, it's hard because you got human nature. You got people, basically we got a country based on greed. And as long as you got that, then it's corrupt. And as long as it's corrupt, you're never going to get a real meeting of the minds on what is best.
So
for the
why don't you
people.
make a film about the America that you are articulating? I mean, why don't you use the power of George Lucas to tell the...
I don't think I have that much power. I mean, I learned, my first film was kind of an indictment of our...
Could I show you a list of the 100 best films and how many of them are made by George Lucas?
Yeah, but they're not made to... Yes, they have a political undertone. I mean, especially Star Wars has got a very, very elaborate social, emotional, political context that it rests in. But of course, nobody was aware of that. Nobody says, oh my gosh. But if you actually watch the movies, it's there, and you subliminally get the fact of what happens to you if you've got a dysfunctional government that's corrupt and doesn't work. But, most of the fault lies with the media. And I know everybody uses the media as a scapegoat. But the things the media focus on, the sensationalism, the kind of simple answers, the not really telling the truth, is what creates a society where everybody gets really polarized, where they're afraid. The legal system, the financial system, the political system, they're all based on winner take all. But that's not a good society. That's not a good culture. That's a culture that is built out of a caveman mentality, where the guy with the biggest hammer wins. That's not a good society.
And you want to see a society that is defined how? By everybody comes out?
By compassion, to saying, we care about everybody in our society. And what we want to do is what's best for everybody in this society. And we want to build the best society where everybody gets the best possible life they can possibly have.
Would you call this democracy? Would you call this socialism? Would you call this some other ism that we don't have a name for it?
Common sense.
We've got some email.
Yeah.
So this comes from Sam. Sam says, longtime listener, first time writer, and most importantly, big fan.
Thanks,
Says
Sam.
Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
I was listening to your new episode on Andor today, which I've been impatiently waiting for. And after finishing the first part of your conversation on Saw, one thought I wanted to throw out there. While I loved the Saw Anakin discussion, the comparison that occurred to me was Saw and Cham Syndulla, who was like the Ghormans. Also, I believe modeled on the French partisans. While Saw and Cham are both committed resistance fighters, sharing a strong distrust of governing institutions, whether the Empire or the Republic. Cham has the benefit of family and community that Saw lost with Steela. After Ryloth is freed, he stays to rebuild rather than looking for the next fight or cause to throw himself into. Put another way, if Saw is Rhydonium, Cham is Durasteel. Hera would probably point out this is an equally apt commentary on his obstinance. While we haven't seen as complete an arc for Cham, I think this comparison furthers the idea you were discussing about doing wrong things for the right reasons. Overarchingly, it's an argument about the grounding power of family and on love versus excessive attachment, which is, in my opinion, the leitmotif of the entire Star Wars franchise. Just thought I would share. Keep up the great work, Sam.
I love it. I have thoughts right out of the gate, but I want to hear yours.
Well, no, go ahead with your thoughts.
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting, and I'm going to invoke Star Cruiser, but the storyline of Star Cruiser, for anybody that was not fortunate enough to go, one of the big storylines of Star Cruiser is that Gaia, who is a galactic superstar, and her manager, Wraith Cole, are there on board. Gaia has been hired to entertain the guests, but there is a whole other thing going on where they are trying to steal a stone that is on the Star Cruiser in a little decorative case thing. It's part of a mechanism that's quite cool. Um, and you find out if you are doing that part of the story that this stone is important to the Twi'leks, is, a vital part of their culture. It's a singing stone that, has been stolen from them. And if you start to talk to Gaia and Wraith a lot, and particularly Gaia, and if you're lucky enough to get, some quiet moments with her, one of the things that comes up over and over and over again is that Ryloth has been used and mistreated by numerous entities, governments, etc., right? Like people that come in and want to say they are going to save you, in fact, will often turn out to exploit you, meaning the planet of Ryloth and the people of Ryloth and the Twi'leks. And so, which is, really quite moving, and was really beautifully conveyed by the actors on board. And it, in thinking about Cham Syndulla and his approach to rebellion and resistance versus Saws, is, I think, informed by that, right? Like, this is a person who has seen his people over and over and over exploited and used in a variety of ways, often by people who sidle up and act like friends. So I think in some ways that is also the big difference there, right? That Onderon has its own set of problems. Like, I don't want to detract from that, but a lot of the Twi'leks behavior when it comes to resistance is based on in some cases, the tricks they have learned from other people that have hurt them, and also just like the knowledge that there is a long tradition of um pain and exploitation that's part of their story. So I think that accounts for some of their differences.
Yeah. I also think that one of the differences that I think is really interesting is if you look at the story of the clones and how the clones were able to interact with the Jedi, that brought out a lot of the individualism and their self-worth.
Hmm.
And the Jedi were able to work directly with the Twi'leks on Ryloth and were embedded with them for a long time, right?
Yeah.
They worked through their entire um, they worked through their entire occupation with them. The Jedi on Onderon were like, "Hey, we can't help you. We'll send a couple of Jedi to train you, but then you guys are on your own."
Yeah.
And there was that lack of like worth that the Jedi assigned to Saw and those people
Yeah.
on top of everything, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, it
Um,
is. Because the lesson becomes for them that they're kind of disposable in comparison to others, which is a
and
sucky ass lesson.
which is one of those political things too, right? Where it's like there's this ridiculous thing where like, well, your leader sucks, and we get that he was installed. Like, we get that the separatists came in, they interfered with your democratic processes. We get that they installed this guy who specifically turned their back on the will of the people, and that there was tampering there. But despite all of that tampering and nonsense, he is, according to our government, the legitimate leader there, or legitimate enough, and we can't interfere. So if we do it, it has to be off the books and under the radar, um, which is really terrible, right? Like,
Yeah.
which is something that we're dealing with here again, where it's like people have to deal with the Trump administration, even though Trump himself has said, like, well, they rigged the election for me. And, you know, Elon Musk has come out and said, since his little Twitter spat with Trump, like, I'm the only reason he won, after huge accusations from credible journalists that, like, there were huge irregularities in all the swing states that Elon Musk's technology was involved in. There's enough smoke there to think that there was definitely some tampering.
Yeah.
Um, that we're just stuck with all the decisions because some rich people decided they thought they knew better than the majority of people in the country. Um, that, like, the Republic can't do anything about Onderon, and they have to abandon those people because the separatists manipulated that system.
Mm-hmm.
It's heartbreaking
Yes.
and frustrating.
Yes. That was a depressing answer to that question, Sam. I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's interesting too. I watched a video of an Iraq veteran. This Iraq veteran did 3 tours in Iraq, and he said that it was at a rally speaking against um, the current regime and the division that they're sowing. And the tone of the speech was very much like it's a common tactic of authoritarians to try to divide up the population. He said Saddam Hussein and his family was in power for, 30, 35 years. And the way they did that was by dividing up their population so that they would fight amongst each other
Uh-huh.
and choose each other as villains instead of the people in power,
Yeah.
who were very clearly the ones pitting all of the people against each other. And it's very hard to see that as not the issue here, where it's like, how is one of the a number of the places that got raided, they raided a Home Depot, they've been raiding restaurants, and it's like, how's the short order cook uh you know a problem somehow? How is the parents with their kids in elementary school somehow a problem? um like, how are these my enemies? They're not.
Right.
But with that propaganda, like on Gorman, convincing some people that they are, they're splitting us up, they're dividing us. How are trans folks? Like, I've seen so many people posting images saying, like, no, it's not Pride Month. You must hate veterans. We need to make this a Veterans Month. Veterans
We
don't
just
have a
had
month.
that. We just had Military Appreciation Month.
Yeah, they have May and November, but no, they need another month somehow
Well, the
for
thing
some
is, they
reason.
don't know about those months because they don't actually care about those issues. They
Well,
just want a reason to justify their hatred of trans people or the LGBTQIA community.
part of it is that they're getting their information from,
Ding dongs.
well, they're getting their information from the propaganda sources who are saying, like, veterans need a month, because the propaganda
Good
sources,
news.
the propaganda sources are withholding the information that the veterans already have May and November,
Yeah.
right? They're saying, well, because if I told you, like, why do they have Pride Month? Why don't we have Veterans Month? If I tell you that, you say, You're right. Why don't veterans have a month? This seems weird. And then you get all upset about it, right?
Right.
But if I
Which
tell
also
you,
gets into an
yeah,
issue of media literacy. Like maybe
yeah,
look up why, like just Google, why don't veterans have a month? And there will be. They do. Ta-da!
but that's not the point.
Yeah,
It's dividing people up so that people don't start looking at the people who are the problem.
right. Right.
Because
I
trans
mean, it's
folks
also,
aren't the
oh, go ahead.
problem. Queer
No,
folks are not the problem. They're not the
no.
enemy. They're not causing a problem.
It's always telling to me that there are, in the midst of all of these raids going on, the idea that, like, oh, we have to find these undocumented people who are working, in these various, in kitchens, in, as, you know, domestic help, as, um, you know, construction workers, etc. But no one's like saying boo about the people who knowingly are employing those people. You don't actually care about any of that, right? Like,
Personally, I don't care about that. I don't care about like,
I don't either, but what I'm saying is they're acting like the problem is these people allegedly taking jobs when it's like, right, but who's hiring them? They're
well,
they're using propaganda to make it seem like it is the employed person's fault and not the person employing them.
yeah. Well, I, the we're not gonna have much of an economy soon anyway, but that's a different story.
Yes.
But so, uh, anyway, let's hope Los Angeles doesn't turn into a Gorman massacre.
Oh God.
Um, I hope that Los Angeles resolves peacefully, and if it doesn't, that it ends with the removal of insanity in our government. Um, and I really like Star Wars, even though it's been revisiting Andor has been hitting a little too close to home when I look at the news these
Right.
last few days
Right.
because I can't not see the parallels. The parallels are way too striking and similar for me not to see it.
Listen, Brian, why you got to make Star Wars political?
I'm not the one who did that. That was George. That was George Lucas.
Yes, it is inherently political. I don't. I
Yeah.
just. I'm ever befuddled by such statements.
Yeah. Oh
That's like a
man.
person that gets cake and only wants to eat the frosting. Don't get me wrong, I love frosting, but like you could just buy a can of frosting if that's all you want.
Yeah. Well, and then they eat the cake and they're like, "What? This? Why this is all just frosting? Like they don't even believe that there's cake there. This wasn't
Now,
cake. This was a can of frosting." And it's like
now
you
I,
clearly bought a cake.
now I want cake.
No, the
Mm,
cake is a lie. Um, yeah.
Cake.
So where can people find you, Holly?
Being depressed. No, I don't mean to invoke that in any way that, you know, anyway, I don't mean to say anything offensive is the bottom line. I probably do all the time. You can find me on the socials trying to find joy. On Instagram at SurlyGirly5 and on Blue Sky as Holly Fry. And I'm still making stuff you missed in history class, which has been talking a lot about current events after the weird firing of the Librarian of Congress, which very much upset me, and the statements of the White House press secretary, it became apparent that they don't know what the Library of Congress does. So we just did an episode on the history of the Library of Congress, and a lot of similar ones have been going on. We've been doing a lot of things inspired by current events. Um,
What the current press secretary doesn't know would fill two Bibles. One, the actual Bible, and two, everything else that they don't know.
yeah. Um, Yeah. Oh, a lot. Yes, you can find me on Stuff You Missed in History Class on Criminalia. If you want to talk about historical true crime, there's also still the Criminalia cocktail book, Killer Cocktails. And I think we are still running season 2 of The Unbelievable with Dan Aykroyd, which I appear on the History Channel as one of the historical commentators throughout. I think those are all the silly places you can find me. How about you, Brian?
You can find me on at swankmotron.com. And my online store, I've got signed copies of all of my books. My seventh BattleTech book just came out. If you want to get any of the signed copies of those there, if you just hit shop at swankmatron.com, you can find me across social media at swankmatron, mainly Blue Sky and Instagram these days. Um, and that's always a lot of fun. Um, and I've got a set of Star Wars cards coming out this month, I believe, that I wrote the backs of that are really cool. And hopefully I'll have some new stuff for you to check out. I'm always doing short stories every month at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/swankmatron. I'd love for you to jump in on that. It's as little as $1 a month, and you just get a short story every month, like clockwork. And I've been doing it for uh, years and years now, close to 10, I think.
Wow.
So yeah, I know, right? So there's lots and lots of stories there. So even for that $1 a month, you get the entire back catalog of stories. So on top of that, speaking of the back catalog, if you want to go check out Full of Sith and fullofsith.com, I went and counted it up. There are 670 releases that you can listen to in our back catalog. If you go to fullofsith.com, you can listen to all of it, including the last couple of weeks. We've just the last couple of weeks. We've had interviews with Tony Gilroy, the showrunner and writer of Andor, and Justina Ireland, one of the chief architects of the High Republic era. And that's just literally the tip of the iceberg of what we've had over the last 13 years of the show. So you can go back and listen to all of that. Be sure to rate and review it wherever it is you listen to it. And send us email at holocron@fullofsith.com. We'd love to hear from you. I'm sure we'll get some hate mail for this episode, maybe, possibly, or not.
Wee!
Maybe. Who knows? I don't know. But unless you think there's anything else, Holly,
No, we've depressed everyone enough.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So, without further ado, then for super producer Mike Pilot and for Holly Fry, I'm Brian Young, and the Force will be with you always.
Sir, if you'll not be needing me, I'll close down for a while.